I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Forge Biologics, and we're really excited to talk today about our company we've just launched in 2020 and how we're applying our learnings in our team to development of rare disease drugs and importantly, the supply of those, manufacturing and supply. So what I'm going to do this morning is talk a little bit about Forge Biologics, but really the way we apply manufacturing solutions and testing, but not only that, but how does this really help to serve the rare disease community in the industry? And I think one of the things that we've seen after a long career, I've been in rare disease for a long time as a drug developer, formerly before joining Forge. What we've seen a lot is really how are we going to supply the demand behind this this group? I know we use the term rare, but really collectively these diseases are, it's quite a large population. And to talk a little bit about the team we have here, we've assembled a gene therapy team that has over 165 years of experience, and specifically a lot of these folks have worked in AAV therapy. So I'll talk a lot today about how AAV is applied to rare disease. And we're led by our CEO, Dr. Tim Miller. Tim has been in not only AAV and gene therapy, but working in rare disease most of his career. He's been a CEO of multiple companies, including Abeona Therapeutics. Tim and I met years ago because we both worked in the epidermolysis bullosa space and really, trying to find good solutions for that disease, but also learned that collectively, there are multiple modalities for patients, and really, there's numerous ways to approach this. And we were joined by Jason Eichholz, our COO, who's with Nationwide, Maria Escolar, who's had a long career in rare disease research, and she's one of the noted Krabbe experts in the world, and moving some of our clinical programs along. David Dismuke, who is the Chief Technical Officer and really, the drives behind our technology, and has been with UNC, Stride, and Voyager, and Rondi Da Silva, who runs all of our product development. And the rest of our team has really collectively been in the space a long time, including Chris Schilling, who was head of regulatory at Nationwide for about 17 years and has done dozens of INDs. So as you're probably seeing the theme with the team here, these are drug developers. And we're really trying to figure out collectively what's a better solution for manufacturing for rare diseases and for gene therapies that might break the CDMO mold a little bit to really help companies, and not only that, but advocacy groups move these programs forward. So we built Forge a little bit differently. This is more of a hub and spoke model that's a hybrid approach. Not only do we give CDMO services for supply, we also have our own rare disease pipeline. And we think there's a lot of advantages for that. One, obviously, we apply our collective knowledge to this, but it also gives us the opportunity to really test drive our own offerings for companies and then provide them back to them, already vetted, either through regulatory or through our own research collaborations. So we can combine our knowledge and really make a better path for companies as they're trying to navigate FDA or EMA or other regulatory bodies. So going back to the topic about rare not being so rare, we always hear things about small populations and individual diseases, but really, collectively, this is a really highly unmet group, and I think everyone in this room knows that from a personal standpoint. That 1 in 10 Americans, 30 million in the US, 400 million globally are affected by rare disease. There's 7,000 different cases, rare disease that exist. Half are usually children. 80% of rare disease are from a genetic origin, so require complex medications and advanced therapies. But, collectively, you're talking about a population that's bigger than cancer or AIDS. And 95% of them don't have any approved treatment. So really, when you think of that collectively, this is a group of diseases that really needs to be addressed, and we're thinking about the scope of that from a supply standpoint. It's enormous. And so what are some ways we can start to chip away at that, and what's the right approach? And that's where we developed Forge from. And let's think about it just from the AAV gene therapy case. Really the amount of resources needed to scale and manufacture them are quite complex, even compared to proteins and mAbs and other therapies. So let's give it, for instance, like one of our what we call bioreactors. These are the devices we use to actually produce the virus that creates the gene therapy doses. One of our 500-liter sizes treats about 10 to 20 patients. So you're talking about a very sizable batch that is usually dosing IV at like 1E14 viral particles per kilogram. It's obviously that's a 6 to 10 month process that we use to manufacture, and you're only producing about 10 to 20 patients. So clearly we need a way to scale this up. This is really not a viable long-term commercial solution to treat these diseases. So, we're already starting to think about what are ways that we can solve that problem efficiently, not only from a cost standpoint, but just from a physical logistics standpoint as well. Really there's a long way to go, and we think we have some good ideas of how to approach that. And really, what about the demand? Let's think about the size of the industry and what's been moving, and just gene therapy alone, never even think about other pharmaceuticals and biologics. As of right now, there's about 700 preclinical pipelines candidates in development, about 350 clinical trials, and about $8 billion that's been invested into the space. And that is an old number now, about the first half of 2020. So clearly there's a large population of products that we need to address in order to make sure, we can really drive things forward. So, there's a lot of challenges in drug development, but I think lately, especially in the gene therapy space, CMC has come up quite often, and really the manufacturing components of that. Why is that? Well, it's very capital intensive. There are groups that will attempt to build in their own manufacturing capabilities, but that's really a high capital need in order to do that. High cost, and then not only just the build of them, but the equipment and maintenance alone really can create a very complex issue for small new companies trying to emerge. The processes are complex. They tend to involve live cells and complex scale-up and purification that requires a lot of experimental design to really optimize. So that tends to take a lot of that 6 to 10 month process I mentioned earlier. And there's just the experience. Luckily, we've seen more and more universities and scientists emerging that really are becoming experts in the space, but we really need more of that to keep up and really keep that supply and demand in balance. And recent trends you probably have seen, there's been a lot of expansion. A lot of companies themselves that are putting on their own manufacturing capabilities. There's a lot of new CDMOs that have been emerging in the space, and there's been heavy investment from large investors. So this is good. This is very promising from a supply standpoint, and there's been a lot of M&A in the space, a lot of new companies being bought by larger groups like Thermo Fisher, and you probably heard about some of the others, including Resilience, and really starting to combine into larger companies, and then rising outsourcing. So, a lot of these tests are going out, analytics, cold chain, really growing into a more of a service-based demand. So that really shows the strong demand as CDMO needs, and we've seen that, from this team and from Forge ourselves, and really, why we think this is an important sector part of the business to develop. And this was published a bit ago, but really the take-home message is, even with our capacity supply, and this includes both CDMOs and companies with their own internal capabilities. The red line shows you that the total cell and gene therapy demand that will be expanding, through the next year, still greatly outweighs the actual capacity. So with all the new companies that are emerging and all the new builds that you hear about, we're still not quite at demand. And we envision this will continue to grow, regardless of global economic trends or regardless of how the markets are. This demand is still present, and we see that continuing to grow from here. And talk a little bit about the model of rare diseases when it comes to companies and how they think about these things when they're trying to drive these to commercial to bring these actual patients. Really, you probably heard a lot of the one-and-done treatments when it comes to AV and gene therapy. And when we think about designing a company and how to fund it around this, when these things are approved, they tend to have this spike in the beginning of profitability, and then, start having a sort of baseline revenue when it stays on the incidence population. A real strong model, you might have heard this a lot of companies, is they create a pipeline. And what they're doing is they're trying to create multiple launches in order to, maintain their revenue, but also to support their R&D for future drugs and future candidates. So the reason I bring this up is pipeline, you probably heard, becomes really common with gene therapy products. So multiple disease states that are driven by one type of product. So an AAV that makes multiple types of proteins. That's how you do multiple launches and you sustain the company and grow into your really large candidates. This is important too because someone's got to make all these drugs. So, we're also seeing companies now coming back for their second and third pipeline product, and it causes us to think about what kind of capacity should we have going forward in order to service all that. So, as you can see, there's plenty of demand, there's future demand, and there's also now pipelines that you have to maintain on some sort of platform. So when we put all that together and start forecasting over the next 3 to 5 years, like how many AAV clinical trials are there going to be? And why that's important is not only from a capacity standpoint, but you start seeing the number on top there, that phase 3 number, grow. And once you hit phase 3, you start thinking about commercial and commercial supply, and how are we going to maintain that in an adequate way, and that the FDA can inspect, and EMA, and have your quality person, your qualified person take care of. So these are all the aspects that we look at when we design the business. Really thinking instead of a year or two out, what does the next 5 to 7 years look like, or even farther? Because we have to start thinking about how do we design our building, how do we design our platform, and how can that happen to touch all these different diseases, So we tried to create a very platform-based approach that you can sort of have a gene and a dream and plug that into your process, and then have a good product come out from the end. And that's because of all these trends that we're seeing in the industry. So with that, we designed Forge more of a hub and spoke model, as I mentioned earlier. We're trying to be very flexible. I'll talk a little bit about de-risking, because I'm going to talk about some of the regulatory aspects of our process that we've used. So when every client or every rare disease candidate goes to the FDA, we're not asking the same questions over and over again. They're addressed because they've been de-risked. Luckily, even with the current financial markets, Forge has been very well financed, so that gives us a lot of solidification for our clients to know that we're going to be here for a long time, and obviously maximizing our assets. And we break down all of our companies, our subs, into different areas underneath our parent company, Forge Biologics. We have our CDMO, but then each of our rare diseases, and I'll talk a little bit about our rare disease platform, stays in its own sub underneath. Why that's important is we don't favor any of the subs or anything for our own manufacturing. Arandi De Silva gets a proposal just like any client would. So, we actually put a wall between those businesses, but we also learn a lot from our rare disease business. So that allows us to grow and help our tools be better as we move forward. So let me talk a little bit about the CDMO, and why I'm going to bring up some of the aspects of Forge is because these are the components that if you're a drug developer, you'll be looking for when you go out and look for your own CDMO. What are the aspects we need to be thinking about when we enter into a relationship with a CDMO, and what are the aspects of development that I need? It's not just manufacturing. Obviously, there's a lot of characterization work and a lot of development, and like I mentioned earlier, these are complex processes. So here's our facility. We call it the Hearth. Obviously, a play on the Forge theme, and it's our 200,000 square foot facility. We're in Columbus, Ohio. You can see Columbus in the background on the picture on the right. Over here, this is Columbus, so we have great access to the airports for shipping and for a cold chain. And here we house our entire operation, which is growing very quickly. So we're after emerging in July of 2020, we're already at 220 employees, and the majority of those are in process development, analytical development, GMP, and quality. So obviously, we put a lot of emphasis in our group on the actual production, development, and creation of these products. And like I mentioned, we have our 200,000 square foot facility, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're growing underneath that shell you saw before. Oops. So here are some of the offerings we give, and we think these are sort of the important aspects of what you need to push through a rare disease program from inception and dream to development all the way through to approval. And obviously, David Dismuke, he's had a lot of years in this and created a lot of different types of AAV, worked with every capsid subtype you can think of, both novel and natural. And he drives our process in analytical development. We find a lot of our clients spend time here. This is where you really need to find your characterization, some of your process development work, really what's your potency assay. This is where we can help clients move this along relatively quickly using our platform, because we have really developed a process that's plug and play. You can put your gene in there, and we can optimize it from that point. And we do this end to end. We do this from we have clients who come in with a construct ready to go, but we also have clients who come in with an idea, and we can help them actually synthesize their early sequences. We also obviously have our cGMP manufacturing capability. We can produce everything from 50 to 1,000 liters, and I'll show a little bit on our bioreactor capabilities in a bit. But we just recently installed 2 5,000 liter bioreactors, which from our understanding, is the largest in the industry. And that's important, and I'll talk a little bit on it in a minute, because if you saw the slide earlier, thinking about how many patients are produced per bioreactor, economically from a cost standpoint, and then eventually you'll have to deal with reimbursement. How do we address that? And I think that scale will be very helpful from that standpoint. We have our state-of-the-art facility, and we also offer regulatory support as well. This is one that's been very popular because of sort of, as I mentioned, there's just not a lot of run rate that's gone through from a regulatory standpoint. And Chris and his team has been offering advice to all of our clients, really what's the right way to approach everything from, helping to write their IND sections to going in front of these regulatory agencies live. So this is the sort of help we've found that not only the companies need, but even advocacy groups who come in with candidates, really looking for advice and help, and really how do you move these things along, and we can provide that as well. So a little bit on the GMP portion. So really the quality standards required to produce these drugs in a safe and effective way. And it starts with our clean room facilities. We're using a lot of single-use systems, segregated upstream, downstream, and unidirectional flow. We have 4 that are active now, 4 clean rooms, and we are actually in the middle of our large build to add an additional 16. That will be done in the 4th quarter, and then we're going to qualify the space. So we're actually growing our facility quite large underneath that shell you saw before, where we can then provide more commercial and automated fill, and that's where our 5,000 liter bioreactors will be housed. So already getting client demand for what does phase 3, what does commercial look like, what would that look like in this facility, and our goal is let's never tech transfer. You really start from here, do your early development, move all the way through and move into commercial, and you don't have to tech transfer from a university or from another location and come back and forth. From personal experience, that is a very difficult and daunting task, so from a comparability standpoint. Quality systems we have in place in order to address everything from a quality standpoint, and obviously a lot of AAV and process development experience for that client journey. You can start wherever you like, and we can help manage that. So I talked a little bit about scale before, and this maybe gives you a little bit of an idea. These bioreactors are the devices, if you're not familiar, we use to actually grow cells that will actually produce the viral vectors that we use as part of the therapies. And as you can see, when we're in research scale, we tend to start at something that's tabletop, 1 to 10 liters. And then there's multiple options. If you have an ocular product, that's sort of a concentrated, localized dose, you tend to use more of the 50-liter size, and it's a bit more on the economical. But if you're an IE administration or CNS or something that's a larger dose, start thinking about the 5,000 all the way up to 5,000, the 500 up to 5,000 liter. Our goal here is to give multiple offerings to be flexible for what I mentioned before. How many patients per run are we going to get? How does that do from a per patient cost standpoint? We already have clients that are thinking about their commercial COGS, their cost of goods. So really these broadly available scales have been popular offerings, and we think are going to be important to drive down some of the pricing that's going on in the rare disease space. So not only do we offer the actual physical manufacturing components, there are also cells and plasmids and all the sort of individual raw materials that are used to produce them. So we have developed our own. One of the biggest questions that come around from a regulatory standpoint in gene therapy is, what does your cell bank look like? And what I mean by that, these are the cells that we use to transfect and then produce the viral particles. But a lot of questions come up about the regulatory history of these cells. Where were they originally? Where did they originate from? What has their history have been? These are questions regulators are normally asking. So we produced a cell line that has no black boxes, that has a very clear regulatory history from experience, knowing that we'd be asked, And so we offer this to our clients. It's clonally derived. It's sub-licensable, so we can sub-license it once you produce your GMP batches with us. And it's optimized and animal component free. So these are things that are really ring true with regulators and with clients as well. We have our own helper plasmid. We did some modifications to it to remove some unnecessary elements and make it smaller, which makes it more efficient to make, and takes away some of the potentially concerning immunogenic sites that can be found in other helper plasmids. And this all leads into our Blaze production. That's actually our check us out and see if you like us offering. You know, this is an off-the-shelf, give us your gene of interest and we'll try it out, produce some vector for you. You can use it for animal studies, or you could just see if we can produce it in an efficient way. This has been really popular with folks that are just, you know, maybe early in their funding cycle and want to try out and see some early data. And it really leads our clients into larger programs. So these are just some of our offerings, we think, but the ultimate goal here is to make a safer, more regulatory, you know, sort of accessible approach for your programs. So that's a little bit about our CDMO business, and then I want to touch on our rare disease pipeline because I do think it's important to show that, you know, all those tools that I mentioned in the bioreactors, everything, you know, this is something we don't just hand over and try out on clients. This is, you know, we really do work on our own development programs, and really gives us ability to access the regulators to see, you know, are we on the right path? Do these seem to be acceptable for IND use? So we do have our own pipeline. We have 2 products right now. Our first announced product is FBX 101 for infantile Krabbe disease. It is IND enabled, so we are actually in a clinical trial I'll talk about shortly. Our second program we haven't announced yet, but yet another rare disease program. And our goal here is to continue to look at candidates that we see either licensable from university or from another location, and continue to grow this pipeline. We think there's a lot of value of bringing these on and have the ability and the right team to actually move these forward. So a little bit on Krabbe disease, if you're unfamiliar, this is a leukodystrophy that does affect both the CNS and the peripheral nervous system. It's rare, neurodegenerative, and affects infants, leading to premature death, usually by the age of 2. Usually presents as mood and behavior and motor function inadequacies, and then progresses relatively quickly. This is a terrible disease. There is no approved therapy right now, and is something that Maria Escolar has worked most of her career on, our CMO, and it's something that you know, we really think needs a genetic approach, and that's why we've looked at this as a candidate for AAV gene therapy. And we're working on a clinical trial now to replace the GALC protein, which is a culprit in this particular disease. A little bit different on our AAV RH10 approach. We're actually combining this with bone marrow transplant therapy. So hematopoietic stem cell therapy occurs first, and then the AAV follows. And we've launched this trial. We're in phase 1/2, currently enrolling patients. But some of the early data that we've collected really does have some interesting comparisons in the animal models. So looking at a Twitcher model, we saw good survivability of subjects with combination therapy in excess of individual therapy each. So, you know, obviously very interesting, not only from a dose and survivability standpoint, but also from a body weight standpoint, which is an indicator in Krabbe of disease issues. So this program also has some dog model data as well that was very promising and is right now in the clinic. So we're really looking forward to reporting out some data on this in the future. And then the reason, you know, I think the internal pipeline, just to reiterate that, you know, we've actually received direct feedback from FDA and EMA and other health authorities on acceptability of not only the facility that I just described, but also the raw materials like our ignition cell, PMBR, our analytical methods, and our quality certification here in the US. So this is something that we can share with clients that are obviously, you know, these programs are very near and dear to them. We want to make sure we take good care of them, but we can actually give you some advantages from a regulatory standpoint by having these offerings. And we also offer a drug master file. So this is a filed dossier with the FDA that talks about, you know, what's our tools that we use and how do we describe them from our data. But really, this is meant to expedite your review process. You know, you don't have your Mod 3 section where you have to have all your descriptions of facilities and process. That's already filed and cross-referenceable as a client. Minimizes your efforts to prepare everything. It gives us a confidential, detailed information right to the regulatory authorities on our platform and all of our different offerings, including our facility and our analytical methods. So in sort of close here, the reason why I think this is important, our goal here is to try to reduce the time, you know, for everybody to get through these the regulatory agencies. And not only that, but create consistency. So this becomes a very routine thing for FDA to review. Now, it's very difficult to talk about things being routine when it comes to not only rare disease, but also advanced therapies. But if we can write some sort of playbook and help the agency through these and sort of understand that we're platforming this in a good way, we hope that this helps accelerate a lot of these review processes and gets things to the market much quicker. That's what we're trying to do at Forge, and we use a lot of these different tools and a lot of these different approaches in our own pipeline to do so. We hope this can be applied very broadly across the industry. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to take any questions.